3.1 and 3.3 is all about trade and economics and intensification. And with that in mind, we got to look at communication and exchange networks, which is once again a fancy way for saying trade, and people are diffusing different identities. And there's a lot of different key concepts that go with this. 3.1, 1, 2. There's a little bit of 3 and 4 in there as well. At the very end, we'll do a little bit of 3.3 discussion when it comes to culture. The big three that we've been introduced to for the other two time periods now have a new trade avenue, and that is the Indian Ocean sea lanes, which have been made possible by different sailing technologies and the compass and stuff like that. Along the way of all these trade routes that are now becoming more and more intensified, whether they're on land or over sea, we find that there are new cities that are being founded. And those cities will serve as really important centers of communication and diffusion. And so, for example, when you do a project on these cities, we're going to cover a lot of those, and you'll have to research developments and all that kind of stuff for several of these major areas. So some examples here of new cities being founded: Buddhism and Confucianism, obviously moving over into the east through different trade cities and places of that nature. Besides that, you have the former foundations of places like Hellenistic influence that have happened because of Alexander the Great. The Middle East especially is a great look at point for that. And then, of course, some of the Western areas, like in modern-day Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Iran, those are also cultural melting pots between East and West, right? Eurasia, and all those land routes and different things that go along with that. Islam, of course, at the very beginning of this time period, was a great spreader of different diffused ideas and technologies and trade, and so expansion of that between two former isolated zones of Africa and the Arabian Peninsula will occur, and of course that'll be very important as we once again go towards bringing different regions together and connect them like we've never seen done before. And the Silk Road has not gone away. In fact, it's becoming more and more profitable and intense due to the Mongols, really. The Mongols, after they disrupt this area a little bit on the short term because of the initial takeover and expansion of their empire, they are going to provide some stability there and actually help grow trade over the empire along the Silk Road. And the regular reason for that is that craftsmen are being moved around from one section to another as the Mongols are conquering one section to another. And so we see a couple of examples here for you that the highly valuable goods from Europe and the Middle East and the Far East are being moved around and traded, and artisans and craftsmen once again are going from their former territories over into other territories, and of course luxury goods usually follow them with that process. Relay stations are one of the biggest additions to this equation that have not previously been discussed. The Mongols, because they are a people that moves largely based on horseback riding and stuff, they need places to stay for those horses to get rest and stuff. So they actually build relay stations, and that increases communication as well. Think of like a modern day post office where you have those offices all over the place, and people can move ideas from one to another more rapidly. Movement along roads and the military also going along those roads leads to safer merchant travel, kind of similar to what we already saw in the classical age with the Roman Empire. Once they start having roads secured by military people, much less crime and safety concerns along those routes. I gave you some examples of some of the cities that you'll have to know basics for. And once again, if you look at the actual cities themselves, there are not that many that are actually on the Silk Road, but there are a bunch that will become connected to one another from one way or another. Also, 3.1 looks at not just in the eastern side of the world, but also in the western world. And we look at, for the first time in a long time, Mesoamerica and the Andes Mountains. So looking at Mesoamerica and the Andes Mountains, you got to break down the foundational points there of the two larger states that are controlling north and south zones of the Andes. And then basically right around the 9th century CE, when the classical period ends in Mesoamerica, you've got different political systems and cultural developments taking place that are going to kind of unify this region here. And then, of course, intermediate cultures in Central America are the same kind of basic storylines as well. Taking the foundation that is already spread out and fragmented, and then you're going to kind of bring those under one banner, so to speak. There are important differences between South America and Central America, and even in some cases North America, which we really don't talk about in this course. For example, the Peruvian cultures used way more metallurgy than their neighbors to the north because they have access to those raw materials. Obviously, raw materials equals typical innovation in that regard. The llama in the Andes allows for pastoralism to be developed, which is going to be a major source of economic and cultural attributes for the Andes mountain regions. Once again, very different than the neighbors to the north in the Central American area, where they can and do grow much more agriculture production. And then, unlike the Maya, the Andean highlands never develop a system of writing. Once again, they have different ways of doing that. So that's going to be a very big difference here between these civilizations that you should be able to keep an eye on. All right, so as a result, you have a few results that I'm going to give you during this presentation of all this intensification. And once again, look at domino effects here. So number one, luxury goods equals more and more technology. So in the map there, you've got some dots that give you sourcing here for different cities that are going to pop up along the Silk Road. And those cities are going to extend themselves and get larger and larger. And once again, they really dominate themselves with those caravanserai, which are the roadside inns that travelers go to for Mongol-occupied Asia. Dominant luxury goods cross across these regions, like porcelain from the Far East, spices from Central Asia, precious metals and gems from the Middle East and Africa, and then you have, of course, African slaves and exotic animals. Silk has not gone away in full, but it is waning in importance there. Cotton textiles are also a new system there. So once again, all those luxury goods being present, you have to be able to move them quicker. Three main ways that we do that here along the Silk Road, especially. Caravanserai, once again, just mentioned that one. Camel saddles, that's another innovation. We've already put saddles and stirrups on horses. Now we're able to use camels for trans-Saharan and Middle East trade, which is going to help out in those regions. And then finally, in Europe and the other Eurasian zones, you've got mail systems. Once again, smaller based locations of communication and messages being delivered. Mail systems, the lead up to modern day postal services. New forms of credit and monetization have already been discussed in previous 3.2 discussions, hopefully, that you have in your notes. But as some examples of luxury goods equaling more and more technology and innovation, which is 3.1.1.c, you've got things like bills of exchange, credit, checks, and banking houses. Once again, you have a lack of precious metals, and therefore you make switches over to paper money and credit and things of that nature, and different establishments are developed like banking houses that can handle that money and the credit. And eventually some places that we see have issues with this because, of course, paper money will lead to inflation in many regards if too much is put on the market. And once again, we have talked about that in other regions. So know some places where this is actually a bad thing, and know some places where this is a good thing. As a second result, you have states doing new things to increase profit. So 3.1.1.d. State practices go a long way with linking actual political agenda to economic and cultural and social development. And in fact, we see oftentimes that states actually practice and sanction different things in order to help, quote-unquote, grow and profit on their emerging trade systems. So a couple of things that I have here for you for that. In the East, you have the Grand Canal. You've read an article about that and already know about its function and how it is helpful. There's a map there that links all these different cities together through the Grand Canal, so you can see just what kind of areas being affected here. Major zones here of profit and trade are now being expanded because they're all linked together through one vast trade network. You also have the minting of coins that takes place, which is good because when you have common currency, that can lead to translation across different borders and standardized pricing once again. So now everybody knows, what is a quarter worth? What is a dime worth? It's not like a quarter in Florida is worth different than a quarter in California. You standardize the money, right? So that's the benefit there is you have common pricing and you can, monitor trade transactions. And then, of course, once again, paper money is being more and more plentiful, and it's being used in more and more places. And, of course, we know why. It's from a lack of precious metals because those things are being used elsewhere. And, of course, some cases where we have inflation will lead to the downfall, unfortunately, for several major empires that we've studied. The other major topic point for result number 2 here is trading organizations. So now you're trying to grow and profit on trade systems. Now trade organizations are used and created to protect and grow and profit on trade systems. So as a few examples there, the main one in Europe that we usually cover for AP is the Hanseatic League. That is a European Union that was designed. Their little symbol there to the bottom left, and the top picture there is for you with some connected trade routes there for the Hanseatic League, and you can see how many cities in Northern Europe and other places were affected, and the road networks there in pink will give you a little marketplace that is on land, although the Hanseatic League itself was mainly designed and implemented to defend maritime trade in the Baltic region. And of course that expands. So take the foundation, expand it. Protection of markets and towns that belong to it will lead to more economic growth for all those belonging members. And then, of course, hopefully you can, at this point, look at some other main benefits of that guild, mainly profit with price controls, all that kind of stuff. And then what types of businesses would benefit from that. Hopefully you can understand what some of those are. In short, it's going to be things like textiles, things where they have fluid pricing because, you don't want one town to have a shirt that's $20 and the same shirt in a town up the road is $100. You want to standardize that, and that's the main benefit of having a trade union and having cities that belong to it. Everybody benefits from a $50 shirt versus having to fight each other for, costing and members and all that kind of stuff. Result 3 of this is that states are expanding and trying to fold their enemies into their trade empires. 3.1.1.E on the key concept chart. Major examples here for you. There are 4. First one, we're going to work our way, is China. They are drawn to their southern and eastern neighbors. Once again, when we talk about the Sui Tang Song dynasties, some of this should be already in your notes. Korea, Vietnam, Japan, all tributary states, and Japan especially will come under contact with China as China continues to try to expand their influence over their neighbors. They will directly expand into Korea and Vietnam and take and give things from them, which you already are aware of. The Byzantine Empire in Eastern Europe vies for the western edge of the Silk Road, which is, Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, stuff like that. And they also vie for control over the Arabian Peninsula, which is obviously going to bring them into conflict with your next one, the Caliphates of the Islamic Empire. Those are going to be eventual conflicts that you already know about with the Crusades and other such influences. The Islamic Caliphates will start to extend into northern Africa and then work their way around counterclockwise there, developing their own base for conversion. And then finally, the Mongols. Everything that they can get to within horse riding capabilities is in range, and they will attempt to go to all of those places. So I gave you the map of just how far, once again, that Mongol Empire had spread to. And when it breaks apart, when Genghis Khan dies and leaves it to his sons, you are given some of those zones right there. You have the Khanate in the center, the Il Khanate in the west, which is modern-day Persia. You have the Golden Horde to the northwest, and then, of course, you have the Chinese Yuan Empire there, the Khanate of the Great Khan to the east. And, of course, as they die off as the leaders, especially in the east, there becomes a power struggle there between the Mongol leaders, and that's what helps kind of slow down and curb the Mongol spread. Certain limitations need to be discussed about this when it comes to technology and environment, which is 3.1.2.a. Long distance trade, as you can see from discussions within your textbook and things that we've talked about in class, sometimes deal with luck and adaptation. So you have to have an environment suitable for long distance trade, for one, and if you don't have something that's suitable for long distance trade, you have to work with technological adaptation in order to help you out with that. So, for example, Scandinavian Vikings, they develop and will adapt their shipping technology to build these shallow, long ships, and that'll be useful for traveling across shorter, more shallow rivers and waterways and estuaries, and will allow them to go into open water as well, so they can kind of go both ways, the ocean and smaller rivers. Arabs and the Berbers in the Middle Eastern and Northern African area will adapt the camel once again and use saddles and things of that nature to adapt to travel across great expanses of desert. Once again, climate, lack of water are certain environmental limitations that you have to deal with when you're trading long distance. And then finally, certain Central Asian pastoral groups along the steppe regions will of course have to adapt horses to help them travel, and of course this is a no-brainer. You're talking about the Mongols here, adapting horses like on the right side picture there with saddles and stirrups to make that trade quicker and more stealthy. All those things will help them conquer this territory very, very quickly. Your fourth result here is just massive, massive amounts of diffusion. Lots and lots of diffusion. So it goes beyond, small scale type stuff at this point. Now we're connecting these regions together like we've never seen done before. So, for example, culture, that happens on numerous levels of scale and span. And of course, it goes across several of your 5 themes. So for religion, you're talking about monotheism. We know about Buddhism and Confucianism spreading from Central Asia to East Asia. Other monotheistic religions are also spreading, like Islam, like Christianity. Christianity working its way down the road here into the Eastern Orthodox Church, which is going to work its way up into places like Russia and Eastern Europe with your Slavic zones. Language, similar thing. You've got everything from Arabic rising to Anglican English. So look at the way that the English language spreads. It does not start in the European zones that we would think, because they've been more developed, like the Byzantine Empire and Western Europe. It actually starts way up north in England when you have certain movements of people coming over, and then those people move down into the continent and bring with them the English language that we will know and use in most of the modern world, or a lot of the modern world, I should say. And then, of course, Chinese language spreading, once again, to the neighbors that they will influence as tributary states. The Bantu language migration that starts off with that little star there in Africa, that basic region, and worked its way down to the south and to the east. And Hindi spreading throughout India, same thing. Different dialects in between will at some point become unified in many ways, and at some level they will stay fragmented, and you'll have that kind of nuance between different language pockets. Diasporic communities are also typically mentioned in this kind of diffusion type of mentality and thinking and migration patterns. And some ones that AP will expect you to know that we don't really cover as much sometimes with our regular discussion, such as Muslim merchants in the Indian Ocean. This is what's going to lead to a decent enough sizable population of Muslim individuals that live in modern-day India. And of course, that's going to lead to some issues down the road. Chinese merchants also developing in Southeast Asia, once again kind of spreading with trade there. Sogdian merchant communities in Central Asia, Jewish communities in the Mediterranean and the Indian Ocean basin, or along the Silk Roads, is also an important diasporic community that you see from time to time that we have to study. Alongside that, with any kind of cultural diffusion, you've got literacy, art, and architecture. We already talked about Neo-Confucianism, how it bonds and blends in Buddhism and Confucianism together. The Mesoamericans also kind of spread the same basic thing of foundations in art and architecture, as you can see from our discussions of Mesoamerica when you look at the ways in which writing systems were taking place with pictograms and all that kind of stuff. Science technology is the final little diffusion main topic here. Think of like all of those Islamic technologies and scientific and mathematical things and concepts that moved over into Europe once the Crusades happened, or once the Muslims went through North Africa and into Spain and Portugal and that region in the Iberian Peninsula. There's a lot of spread there that you've already read an article about, so just make sure you're all kind of synthesizing all that stuff. Other travelers and traders that you will already be needing to cover very soon include the two main travelers, quote-unquote, of the age, Marco Polo and Ibn Battuta. So you'll be looking at them with some primary document analysis very shortly. The fifth result here is the rise of disease and crop spread. So new foods and techniques are adopted in different regions to help kind of influence the population rise. Bananas in Africa are a really good one. Rice varieties in East Asia with champa rice, which we talked about with Sweet Tang Song. And then other goods like cotton, sugar, and citrus spread to the Islamic Empire, and then they spread to the Mediterranean basin. So all those things are going to be important, goods that are going to be tradable later on as industry. And then whenever you talk about trade, that's movement and communication and all that kind of stuff. Disease has to be discussed at that level. With that, the main one, of course, for the time period is the Black Death, which will follow trade and military conquest through the spreading of parasites, fleas, rats, other such animals that are going to be, traveling with traders, especially like on stuff like where they can, get into boxes that stay on ships and stuff, and then they have the disease, and then of course they get to Europe, and we know what the Black Death does. It wipes out nearly half of the population of Europe, which is a disastrous deal for them for the short term. And then finally here, we've got result number 6, YODA domino effects, as I call it. And this is actually the 3.3.1 discussion. A through C kind of touch on this a little bit. So basically, in your best YODA voice internally, I want you to kind of say this to yourself, that trade leads to movement, right, with diffusion and exploration / settlement, right? And then movement leads to growth. So when you have expanding populations and you can kind of subside after disease, then you can lead to more and more, rebounds of that. Growth of population leads to innovation, so more people can have more minds and brain power. Technology is therefore implemented and is seen to be very, very useful, duh. And then innovation leads to stimulation, so play things like agriculture and industry. Once again, movement like champa rice, like the Chinapa field systems in Mesoamerica, Waru techniques in the Andean region, where you have the kind of combination of raised beds and irrigation channels, right, can lead to less issues down the road. All those stimulations of innovation are very helpful, and that can once again go back into improving different techniques of farming, and that's never a bad thing, right? So improved terracing techniques, the horse collar for using pack animals at a different level, that is also going to be really, really helpful for stimulation of industry and agriculture. Finally, stimulation leads to trade, and then once again you have kind of like a circle of life here, so cue that little music in your head. Trade picking up will, of course, once again, if you start at the very, very, very top, will lead to movement and so forth and so on. We are going to be connecting these areas like never before because of this domino effect here, this circle of life when it comes to trade leading to stimulation, leading to trade, and vice versa. The key here, once again, typically is adapting to environmental changes and other adaptations like technology and culture and all those kinds of things. If you can adapt to those ideas and those limitations, I should say, typically you have a much better chance of survival and being around to see the end of that circle.